Hello, art historians, and we're back for our last video that will be part of our early Europe study. And this is our video on the art of the colonial Americas. And so what we're looking at is we're looking at areas like the United States and Mexico, and where other areas where colonial powers like France and Spain and England came in and made impacts on the lives of the indigenous people. The majority of, if not all of, actually I think all of what we're looking at is actually colonial impact from Spain. And so that's what I'm pretty positive they're all Spanish. I think so. All right, here we go. Colonial America. All right. So the first piece we have is called the frontispiece, or the beginning page, the first page of the Codex Mendoza. And a codex is a book. It's a manuscript book. And so what we have is the front page of this manuscript. And it is named after the person who commissioned it, Antonio Mendoza, who was the Viceroy of New Spain. And he was the Viceroy of New Spain. He was located in modern-day Mexico City, and he was sent to the New Spain by Charles V, who was the head of the Holy Roman Empire. And so what he did was he went over to New Spain, and he became familiar with the native people, and his job was to basically report back to Spain what was going on there, how's it going, what did you learn, what do we know. And so what you have is sort of this collection of images that were gathered together by Antonio Mendoza. So it's ink and color on paper. And I'm just going to scroll and show you this page. So the Codex, now known as the Codex Mendoza, contains information about the people that were in charge of Tenochtitlan, which we know is part of the the Aztec Empire. And it's about the people, the rulers of Tenochtitlan, the tribute that was paid to the Aztecs by the people that they conquered. And it was basically an account of the average person's life from year to year. It was written on European paper that was brought with them to New Spain. And it is 71 pages, like sheets of paper long. And it's divided into three basic sections. So the first section is just those 16 pages that the people tell, the Aztec people tell sort of the history of their people from 1325 through 1521, when the Spanish came. And so it's from the founding of Tenochtitlan as the capital of the Aztec Empire through the Spanish conquest. It tells who the rulers were. It tells how long they ruled. It talks about the towns and who conquered them and how that all happened. Then the second page, or the second section, is about 39 pages and is a list of the towns that were conquered by the Aztecs and broken into, like, here are the towns and this is the tribute they paid. It's kind of like a bookkeeping. And then the third one is 16 pages. That's like a pictorial depiction, like in pictures, the daily life of the Aztecs. It is really an interesting collection of images, because as you look at it, what you see is it's ink and color. There is some oil paint on here, just a little bit. And we know that what we're looking at is some of the original Spanish influence combined with the native artists, because in some places we see that the native artists focused less on perspective and they used more earth tones, and then we begin to see in some of the pages some Catholic imagery added on top. This this book never made it to Spain, though. It was created about 20 years after the Spanish conquest. Because we always say 1521. It was 20 years after the Spanish conquest. It's a ton of information for historians about Aztecs and Tenochtitlan and stuff like that. But so Mendoza commissioned it. It took about 2 years for it to be finished. And then Mendoza sent it back on a boat to make its way to Charles V, who was the Holy Roman Emperor, and ruled. And the book never made it to Spain because the boat was assaulted by pirates, and the pirates took it and took the book to France. So sometimes you get what's coming to you when you're a conqueror and you try to take over places, and then you try to show off how cool you are, and then people are like, well, I'm gonna just take that from you. So what's really interesting about this is, and I'm going to scroll to some of the other pictures. This is the frontispiece. We see the marking of the eagle sitting on the cactus at the meeting of the two rivers, which is a symbol for Tenochtitlan, and Tenochtitlan, the Aztec Empire, being broken down into 4 quadrants. That symbol of the eagle on the cactus is actually on the Mexican flag. I mean, that's an image that is hundreds of years old and is still part of the Mexican flag today. We see the where it's broken into the 4 quadrants, the 4 sections of the Aztec Empire. We see this is the reflection of Templo Mayor. That's what it's a drawing of. It's Templo Mayor up here above the eagle's head. And we see Aztec warriors with weapons. We see Aztec designs of animals. And here's sort of our hint at our some of our calendars. So we see a lot of pieces that are common in the iconography of the Aztecs. Again, we see depictions of war. We see depictions of plants and gods and things like that. The annotations that we see here are very interesting because what you have is the assistance of priests who spoke Spanish, but also learned Nahuatl, which is the language of the Aztecs, Nahuatl. You have priests who learn Nahuatl, and then they do some translation of what they're looking at from Nahuatl into Spanish, so that there is some sort of ability when this book gets to Spain, which it never does, to be able to understand what they're looking at. So this depicts the rule and the conquests. This is the tributes that was paid by towns to the empire. And this book is really super crazy important because it allows for there to be the telling of important information, and it allows for modern day archaeologists to be able to, and art historians to be able to look at this and learn so much about the history of the Aztecs. And it's a history book. I mean, when you go back to this piece, remember that the first 16 pages are the history of the Aztec people from the founding of the Aztec Empire in 1325 until the conquest in 1521. It's a history book, and it's a visual history book. It's a really, really cool depiction of life and their iconography and their drawing style and all kinds of things that were uncommon in Spain at the time. Okay, and it's not heavily influenced by Europeans, which is really nice. Most of this is really their own form of art without too much heavy influence of the Europeans, which is very different from this piece, which is the next piece that we're doing, called Angel with an Arquebus. And an arquebus is that gun. that you see there. It's a gun that sits on your shoulder when you fire it, kind of like it's like that one. And it's also called Asiel Timor Dei, which translates into the angel who fears God. So what you're looking at is a couple of things here. You're looking at a painting that says by the Master of Calamarca. The Master of Calamarca is a painter from this area around Peru, and what you're seeing is someone who we've identified probably as Jose Lopez de los Rios, except the College Board is not saying that. The College Board is saying go with Master of Calamarca because we're not entirely 100% sure of who the Master of Calamarca is. What does the La Paz School mean? The La Paz School is an area sort of around Peru where a bunch of excuse me, my brain just had a hiccup, where a bunch of artists all painted together. And so they're able to group a bunch of artists all together as the La Paz School. They all sort of learned art the same way, were influenced by art the same way, and their art all looks similar. This is painted sometime in the 1600s. And it's oil on canvas, which means that the oil paints made their way from Spain to the New World. It means that the canvas made its way from Spain to the New World. And it means that when you look at this, it means that European painting style made it from Spain to the New World, because this is heavily influenced by the way that painting was being done in Europe. The La Paz School is located, they're saying, around the Andes, near Lake Titicaca, through Peru and into Argentina. And it just basically is a way to identify a group of paintings that came out around the same time by artists who were similarly influenced by Spanish art. And so what you're looking at is an angel. So you have your celestial being, your angel, your heavenly being. But what you're also looking at are a couple of other representations here. And they're really important. So the first one is that it's celestial. It is called the angel with an arquebus. Asiel is an archangel. So you see celestial or spiritual. He is dressed in what is very clearly aristocratic clothes. It's very, very wealthy clothes. Okay, and we can see that. But he also has a gun, which is military influence. And so what you see here is an attempt to depict spiritual, aristocratic, and military power all at once. And the idea that the spiritual, aristocratic, and military power all at once lies in Spain and New Spain. This was one of a set of an angel with an arquebus. Then there were drummers, sword bearers, buglers, and the standard bearer. And in the upper corner, it is Latin for the archangel. Now, there's some interesting iconography here. The angel does not have his finger in the trigger. He is just holding it. And it is held with his face in a serene way. So it's not meant to be terribly frightening. It's to let you know I have power and I can use it if I want to, but I'm not going to right this minute. The pose that the angel is in, Asiel is in, is a military pose. And it is taken from commonly painted imagery of military people in European portraits. So some kind of European portrait artist came to the New World and influenced the painting of those people that painted in the La Paz School. Okay, the clothing is clearly European, except the hat, where it's very clear there is indigenous parts of indigenous costume in the flowers that are on it. Okay, so we see these mixes of military and and wealth and Europe and the New World. And so, this is just the way of showing in New Spain the power of the Spanish. And again, as they believed always, that they were divinely inspired. They had the divine right to go into this new world and take over and bring Catholicism to the savages, is how they saw that. And so they believed that God was on their side in teaching the people, the indigenous people of the indigenous Aztecs and Incas, in convincing them that Catholicism and the way of Europe was the correct way to live. And so you see that in these paintings that are created by native people, by indigenous people, whose own art has been influenced by Europe. You're going to want to call this a guardian figure, because that's what it is. It's meant to sort of, guard, protect the bearers of this. You'll also want to put Western influence. That's probably also an excellent theme to talk about Western influence. So we'll go there. The next one I'm going to show you is very interesting. It's called The Folding Screen with the Siege of Belgrade and Hunting Scene. Some of these pieces are a little hard to identify what exactly is going on here. So this piece was made in Mexico, what is modern day Mexico, and it is made from tempera and wood and shell inlay on like this wood panel that folds, like it's a folding screen to separate a room. We know that it was commissioned and owned by the Viceroy of New Spain in Mexico. We know that it was on display at the Viceroy's Palace in Mexico City. And we know that it was influenced by Japanese art of Japan and art of the Philippines. Each side is very different. When we talk about the artist being the circle of the Gonzalez family, we do not know exactly who the artist was. We can guess at, there was a Gonzalez family, and they were known for being very famous artists, and it is assumed that it came from someone that was related to them. Kind of like the School of La Paz, you can't say exactly what artist it was, but it was from an artist in this area. It's the same with the circle of the Gonzalez family. We can't say exactly who painted it, but it was someone related to this artistic family. All right, so why do we have this? Well, Jose Sarmiento de Valadres, you don't need to know his name, but I like to say it because I feel like it's important. He becomes the Viceroy of New Spain. That's all I have to say, Viceroy of New Spain. And New Spain, which we now call Mexico, was making huge money for real Spain back in Europe. New Spain had silver, they had jewels, they had tobacco, they had spices, they had all this stuff that they were able to send back to Spain, and they were making mad money for the Spanish. And so because of that, the Viceroy of New Spain was able to afford a beautiful, luxurious home, because the people in Spain were like, make yourself a nice palace. And so he did. And he was also able to trade with the Japanese, because think about where sort of Mexico sits. It has access to the Pacific and the Atlantic. So it was doing some trade across the Atlantic with Europe. It was doing trade across the Pacific with Asia. And so this is based on a Japanese screen called a bayombo. And what it's called a bayombo, it's based on the Spanish boat, but it is a specific kind of bayombo, which is, it's called a bayombo enconchado, which means that it's encrusted with shells. It's all shell work that is set up on top of this wood. So kind of like mosaic is glass tile, this is all pieces of shell. It's really amazing. It's painted with tempera, and it has a bunch of shells on it. This is located at the Brooklyn Museum, and it's probably the best example of um, Spanish, New Spain, Mexican, Japanese lacquerware. It's really, really unique. It's really, really expensive. It's really an amazing piece of history because there's pretty much nothing like it anywhere ever. Um, and it has to do a lot with the influence of trade, the influence of where the viceroyalty house in New Spain was, and the people that lived in the house. So when you're looking at it, it has two sides. One has a war scene and one has a hunting scene. And the bottom has sort of like a cool landscape, and the border is all like, it's meant to look like a tapestry, like that you would hang in an expensive house. But each side has a different audience. And the reason that each side has a different audience is, remember, we're a delicate society, and men and women would often entertain separately. So if you had a big dinner party and you were the viceroy of New Spain, you would have a dinner party and men would bring their wives. And then after the end of dinner, the men would retire to one room and the women would retire to another. They wouldn't usually gather together to entertain at the same time. The women would do things like listen to music and maybe sew and whatever, and the men would drink and maybe smoke cigars, and it was entertaining that was done separately. So each side of the screen was set up for a different viewing audience. Depending on what room it was in and who was in there would depend on which scene was facing out. So this one on this side is the Siege of Belgrade. And I'm going to go to the next slide so that you can see it a little better. Okay. And this is basically a scene of chaos. This is the Great Turkish War that lasted from 1683 to 1699. And it is where the Habsburg Empire, which is the Spanish ruling family, let's try that again. The Habsburg Empire, who were the Spanish royal family, was fighting against the Ottoman Turks. This battle happened just before the creation of this screen. When you're thinking that this battle was 1683 to 1699, and the beginning of this screen was 1697, we assume the one side was probably done sooner, the hunting side, but we'll get to that. So this is a contemporary image. The Ottoman Turks come from Asia in an attempt to invade Europe. They are unsuccessful. The Habsburgs beat them back, and they win at the Siege of Belgrade. And because the Habsburg Empire is also the same thing as the Spanish ruling family, and New Spain / Mexico is the colony of Spain, of course, we will want this beautiful piece of art that shows the Spanish being successful. And that's what you're looking at. You're looking at let me just zoom in here. You're looking at people with their heads on a spike. You're looking at the fight over the wall here. You're looking at horses, and this is to show you where this is. It's right here. Okay, Belgrade. It's right next to Romania and Hungary. Okay, and so the Ottoman Turks come up here through Turkey, right, and across Europe, and they want to try to just take over, and it doesn't work for them. Okay, and so you can see here, this is really cool. It's folded, so you can sort of see the hinge there, and you can see through there, and you can sort of see this scene with lots of shells in the floral border, and we see lots of, the helmets have shell in them. See that little piece of shell there and the little piece of shell there that would catch the light when there were candles going, so that it would sort of seem to flicker and shine. You can even see here, like that shell. You can see sort of like how it appears to be brighter in some places. That's because of these pieces of shell, that when it catches the light, it's really bright. And it would have looked like it had movement in it when the candle would flicker. And what is the purpose of this side? It's to show power. It's to show military might. It is to show that, Spain controls pretty much all of this, because the Spanish family was the Habsburg Empire that was in control of everything at the time. right? So it's a way to sort of like, if you get on our bad side, we'll cut your head off and put it on a spike. It's basically what this thing is saying. So if the men were all gathered around talking about how amazing Spain is, this is clearly the side that would be showing. Now, if you went into the parlor with the ladies and you were, sewing, you would get this side, which is the hunting scene. Okay. And it's decorative, and its little flower border here looks like it could be fabric. It's mostly a landscape, again, based on French tapestries. And it's meant to look like you're in a drawing room. Like you're just, you're just sitting in a beautiful, a house that looks out over this beautiful land where you could just go hunting, and you're in France or in regular Spain looking out. But there are also some floral decorations that remind us of the fact that this is influenced by the Japanese. There's beautiful and excellent precise detail. And this is the side that would have been reserved for the women. Now, what's interesting about this, and kind of strange to me, is as I'm looking at the hunting scene and I see all these beautiful things, it's not quite as peaceful as you might think. They're hunting, this person has birds, this person's going to kill this tiger that is attacking this even the hunting side is a little bit violent, but you can see really there's beautiful examples of the shell and how it's how it catches the light. But the thing that is the sort of the most upsetting about this hunting scene is that the viceroy's wife, remember, he's the rich guy that, the viceroy married someone who was descended from Montezuma, the leader of the Aztecs. Her great grandmother, I think, or something like that, was related to Montezuma. So she is one of the Aztecs that they have now controlled. She is descended from them, and she is married to someone who's Spanish. It's very, very, very interesting. Okay, our next image is this piece. Now, this comes with a story, so hold on a minute. Okay, this is called the Virgin of Guadalupe. This is the holy relic that it is based on. This is our image. Okay. Our image, this one right here, was created by an artist named Miguel Gonzalez in 1698. It is based on the original Virgin of Guadalupe, this piece on fabric, that is located at the Basilica of Guadalupe in Mexico City. Ours is oil on canvas on wood with inlaid mother of pearl. All right. It is important that you understand the story that goes with this. So if you do not know a great deal about the Virgin of Guadalupe, then I'm going to tell you a story. So here we go. I need to take a drink of water. Hold on one second. All right. So this is made in 1698. In 1531, 10 years after the Spanish defeat the Aztecs, an indigenous man who had been, an Aztec that was now conquered by the Spanish, an indigenous man named Juan Diego, has a vision. And this vision happens while the Spanish have sent missionaries over to convert the native Aztecs into being Catholic. And Juan Diego is walking up on the hill of Tepeyac, and he comes up on this hill, and he says the Virgin Mary appears to him. And she appears to him, and she looks like this picture right here. She appears to him, and she speaks to him in the Aztec language, Nahuatl, and she tells him to go to the bishop, the Spanish bishop that is here trying to convert the native Aztecs. She tells him to go to the bishop and tell the bishop to build a church dedicated to Mary on this hill where we're standing right now. And he goes to the bishop, and the bishop sort of ignores him. And the bishop ignores him again, and the bishop ignores him again. So he's back up on the hill. Juan Diego goes back up to the hill, and Mary appears to him again. And she says to Juan Diego, gather these roses by my feet in your cloak and take them to the bishop as a sign. So he takes his cloak off, and he takes the roses that were at the feet where Mary appeared to him, and he puts them in his cloak, and he carries his cloak to the bishop. And when he gets to the bishop, he says, Mary told me to bring you these roses. She appeared to me again. And he opens up his cloak, and instead of there being roses on his cloak, what is on the inside of his cloak where the roses were is this image of Mary. He opens it up. This image of Mary is there. The bishop says, okay, well, this is clearly a sign from Mary. The Catholics there saw this as God and Mary saying that what they were doing to convert the native Aztecs to Catholicism was the right thing to do. And they do, in fact, build a huge church to Mary, the Basilica of Guadalupe, right there. And they hang this Juan Diego's robe with this image is hanging in that church. Okay. So a couple of things. The place where Mary appears to him at the top of the hill of Tepeyac had been the location for a temple for the worship of one of the Aztec goddesses. And so again, the Catholics that were there on their missionary work saw this as a sign from God to continue the work of converting the Aztec natives to Catholicism, because Mary appeared to this Aztec man and said, do this and look at this thing. So it's important that you see that the construction of this Basilica of Guadalupe is based entirely around this story, which happened in 1531. So 150 years later, 160 years later, the artist Miguel Gonzalez creates our image that we study, which is this one that I talked about. Is made of, it's oil on canvas that then has, the canvas is stretched over wood, and then there's mother of pearl on top of the canvas, and then he painted it a frame as well. So what this is, this is considered to be, this image of Mary is often called the miraculous image of Guadalupe or the Virgin of Guadalupe. Okay, so those are some of the names that it is referred to as. And what he did was he did an enconchado, which is a mother of pearl decoration inlaid into wood, similar to our screen. Why? Because the mother of pearl, the inside of a shell that creates this mother of pearl, it again flickers with the light. It makes you think of divine light. Imagine that it's lit by candles and it's sparkling in the candlelight. And she is surrounded by the rays of the sun. That is what those lines around her are. And it is based on a line from the book of Revelation that says, that basically hints at Mary being present at the end of days. A great sign appeared in the sky, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of stars. And so this is the image that we see of Mary, surrounded by stars with the moon. You can see the crescent moon under her feet, and you can see it there in ours as well. And so she's surrounded by the rays of the sun. She's standing on the moon. And sometimes the depiction of Mary has stars on the top of her crown. So when we look at it, we see then that the image that Miguel Gonzalez created is a little bit different than the original image. It starts with we often see Mary depicted as being very, very, very white. Mary is not white here. She's definitely brown. This image of her is often called the dark virgin, because her skin is darker. And it is the belief that Miguel Gonzalez tried to make her look similar to the indigenous people of Mexico. She is the patron saint of Mexico. It is a very popular image to see in Mexico. And when you look at this image, you can see that not only do we see Mary, we see the scenes of Juan Diego seeing her, him trying to tell people, him seeing her again, and then finally him appearing to the bishop. But look down here, we see the eagle on top of the cactus, which is the symbol of Mexico. So we get sort of this Catholic art. We get the influence of Japanese art with the Encanchado. We get the influence of European art with some of the little stories that are told in the roundels. And again, this is a wonderful, wonderful example of artwork that is influenced by European artwork. Okay, and I'm just going to scroll one more to show. These are the paintings along the outside border. This is a little bit closer up, and here's one of those roundels. This is when Juan Diego hands them the cloak, and you can see the image of the Virgin Mary on the cloak, and you can see all the little sparkles from the mother of pearl. Okay. All right, of all of the pieces that I teach in all of AP art history, this one is the one that is the hardest for me to teach. I dislike this image, and it is a difficult image for me to teach because of what it is. Let's look at it. This is called a casta painting, Casta. It is called A Spaniard and an Indian Produce a Mestizo. Your artist is Juan Rodriguez Juarez. Painted in 1715, oil on canvas. And so what you see is a man who is from Spain, a Spaniard, an Indian, so a native Aztec. Okay. And when a Spanish person marries a native person, the kind of child they produce is called a mestizo. So what you're looking at is one in a series of paintings that showed what happens when races intermarried. And I find them to be disgusting. So what you see here is are the 16 types of families. When a Spanish person and a Spanish person have a baby, it's a Spanish person. When a Spanish person and a native person has a baby, it's called this. It is, so what it is as I said, a casta painting, paintings that were created in New Spain showing people of mixed races. And a mestizo is defined as someone that is a mix of European and Native American descent. And what happened is in the colonies, the Spanish were at the top of the social hierarchy. And so there were 16 established levels of social scale. And their social scale was tied to their racial makeup. And so the painting's job is to, so here's our Spaniard and our Native American. Right, come back to our original painting. And the painting's job is to show that that the Spanish blood is considered to be a civilizing force. And the less Spanish blood you see in these paintings, the less civilized the people in the paintings appear to be. There are paintings of Spaniards and Native Indians. I'm going to call them Indians because that's what this painting calls them. So there's, Spaniards and Indians. There's Spaniards and Africans. They are meant to show uh, people back in Europe that the caste system was working, that that separating people based on their racial mixing shows that the people who have less Spanish in them are less the more racial mixing, the poorer the people are in the pictures. The darker the skin, the poorer the people are in these pictures. It is early racism. These paintings were not meant to be seen as art. These paintings were used as a way of ethnically grouping people. They were numbered 1 through 16. They were given their little racial descriptions. I'm sure you've heard some of the words mulatto and things like that. And it was all connected to where the European blood was in their biological makeup. They believed that this was a rational thing to do, to try to separate people based on their biological makeup. They didn't see it as being offensive. They were just pointing out that that the that the Spanish blood was civilizing, and that without the Spanish blood, you were more likely to not be. Gosh, I hate teaching this. You were not likely to be sophisticated if you had less Spanish blood in you. This is, this is where we get the mestizo. There was mulatto. There were all of these different words that were attached to the, in quotes, please, the purity of blood. And then once some of these people began to move back to Spain, then there really became a real caste system, even in Spain, based on some of these images that were created. And so this is really the beginning of what becomes just really disgusting eugenicist ideas of classifying people. And in this one, we see this rich Spanish man. We see this native person in traditional Aztec. It's called a huipil. It's traditional Aztec garment, and they have a servant. He is dressed, while he is considered to be Spanish, it says a Spaniard, he is dressed in French clothes and has powdered hair and powdered face, which was not unusual. The job of this painting and the other 15 in its set was to identify the Spanish person as noble, and the not Spanish person as less noble. And when you get down to all, native blood, then all of these that have the native blood in them, they're much poorer. I really hate teaching that. Okay, moving on. This is our last one in Colonial. And this is a portrait of Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. Okay, Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. Okay, Sor means she's a sister, a nun. And so when we're looking at this image, we see a lot of things going on here. We see her sitting at her desk, and we're going to talk a little bit about what we have here. Your artist, Miguel Cabrera, 1750, where we've really moved up in time here. we're looking at oil on campus. She is the first feminist, really, of the Americas. And she is really cool. She was a member of the Order of St. Jerome. So she was a nun in the Order of St. Jerome. She was a Creole woman. So she's from, like near like Spain, I'm sorry, Mexico, Louisiana, Mexicans, Spanish, French influence. Um, and she was a child prodigy. What do I mean? She was brilliant. She could read at a young age. She could write at a young age. She had a ridiculous memory, could remember everything. She wrote plays, she wrote poetry, she studied science, she studied theology. She fought for girls to be educated. She believed that there should be libraries. She believed that women should read. She believed that children should be taken care of. She was just really all about bringing knowledge to the poor, to the sick, to everybody, women. And she becomes a nun because in convents in Mexico, nuns lived a pretty privileged life. There was no one there really to tell them what to do other than other nuns. There weren't really men to boss them around, and they were left primarily to their own devices. She was left alone. This is one image, and I have this other image that I prefer, and I think this might be a slightly altered as far as the color goes. I think this is probably closer to what it looks like now, and this is with the color slightly altered, but I think it's easier to see what's going on in this one. And so what you have here is a woman who was very intelligent and who became a nun so that she could read. She wrote plays and poetry. She wrote to scientists. She wrote to theologists. She wrote to philosophers. She is seen here at a desk with a book open. And she is seen, the book that is open is a book by St. Jerome, who was considered what they call a doctor of the church, was talked about early like theology. You see these things around her that are so many books and religious texts, and the clock and the quill. It shows that she can write, she reads. And so what ends up happening is this is a posthumous portrait. She was doing all this writing, and then the church got wind of all of her writing and reading, and they took away her library. They took away all her books. They made her stop writing, and she had to stop being sort of an intellectual, and they made her go out and work with the sick. So what we see is that they force her to give up this life of this intellectual life, and she goes out to minister to the sick, and she dies shortly thereafter. So this posthumous painting of her has some things in here that are hints at what happened to her. So that big red curtain in the background is meant to be like a red velvet curtain that shows her wealth. The thing around her neck, that big oval thing that you've probably been thinking about this whole time, like what is that? It's called an escudo, and it's a nun's badge. You wouldn't have worn that all the time, but it shows the Annunciation. Here we see the angel Gabriel presenting himself to the Virgin Mary. We see her cross and her rosary. Okay, so we see the pieces of her faith. But there's also a heavy reliance on red here because the posthumous portrait of her really hints at her death, which most people attribute to or put at the feet of the Catholic Church, because she was knowledgeable, because she was a reader, because she was a writer, she was a thinker, a philosopher, and they didn't like it, and they made her stop doing it, and shortly thereafter she dies. So a lot of the red imagery is symbolic of the loss, her loss to society when she died from her illness. So early feminist imagery, early focus on the power of education, early focus on women trying to fight for education of other women, focus on science. She's doing this around the same time that Rachel Royce is painting Her Fruit and Insects. So, we're looking at, it's an important image. And that is the end of our colonial imagery. We have finished early Europe. We have finished the colonial period. I hope that you had a good time, and I'll see you next time.